Hey there, Julie Foudy, former captain of the U.S. Women's National Team, two-time Olympic gold medalist, World Cup champion as well, and most important, guest on the Chris Waddell Living It podcast. Yes! Add that to my bio, please. Put it on the top of the resume. I'm psyched to be talking with Chris.
She and her teammates from the 1999 Women's World Cup soccer team were my heroes. And then I met Julie in person and she became an even bigger hero. They taught clinics, they reached out, they filled the Rose Bowl back in 1999. She's continued to do so much more, tell the story of the game. We'll be covering the World Cup from New Zealand and Australia this summer. And she is just an amazing person. I hope you get a chance to tune in and check it out. Hi, I'm Chris Waddell. Welcome to Living It, the podcast where we join experts in the experience of being human. Be bold. Say yes to adventure. Say yes to living it. Welcome to Chris Waddell Living It, where we talk with experts in the experience of being human, those who've taken the risk to realize their dreams and live fully. Today, we actually have one of my heroes. I think I'm going to embarrass her a little bit by saying that. She was number 11 midfielder, U.S. Women's National Team from 1987 through 2004, two-time World Cup winner, two-time Olympic gold medalist, silver medal in the Olympics, was captain of the team from 2000 to 2004, started covering major soccer in 1998 while she was still active and continues to this day. She does feature reporting, podcasting, writing, host of the podcast, Laughter Permitted, which there is a lot of laughter in the podcast, which interviews trailblazers in sports and the joy, chaos of the life of sports. She doesn't necessarily know this, but her team is the model that I've looked at. I mean, being someone with a disability, trying to change the way that the world sees us as athletes, as sees us as people. You guys created that model, which I use to this day. So thank you very much for doing that. Thank you for joining me.
What a nice intro, Chris. Can you intro me for everything, please?
I'd love to.
You got one thing wrong. It's not silver medal. It's not silver medal. It's white gold is what we call the Olympic silver medal. White gold.
White gold. Wow. I did not know that. Gold. I should have asked you that before we started.
Oh, that one hurts still today. 2000 Olympics, Norway. Damn.
It's kind of funny because actually over my shoulder is because 2000 was Sydney, right? So that's actually my silver medal from Sydney.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So you got a white gold too. Look at that.
I got a white gold. The only one that I won in the summer was the silver medal from Sydney. So yeah. Nice. But I look at it and I don't think it was so funny because oftentimes they say, don't meet your heroes. Like they won't, but like meeting you, meeting Mia, meeting Brandy, like you guys exceed what I thought I was going to meet. I don't know. You probably hear that all the time, but the model part, how do you understand kind of what the trailblazing part that you've done for so many other people who might not necessarily be in the, in the main lane, right? Be more peripheral.
Right. Yeah. I think it's hard to understand it entirely, but it's super gratifying when, people say the impact that group has had on them, and not just sports, of course, but in other ways. And so, and then, to see the current iteration of this team continue to fight for things that mattered deeply to us and still matter deeply to us is so phenomenal. So yeah, we do take a lot of pride in that because our big thing back in the day was, of course, winning is fantastic and standing on top of podiums is fantastic, but really our overall mission was to not just change the game, but to change the way people perceived women playing sports, change the way people perceived women in society and their role in society. And so, and I think in some small measure, what we did in 1999, in particular in the United States, really showed women in a different light and what was possible for women. So yeah, it's really cool to hear when people say that.
One of the things you've been really successful in is passing that baton too. I mean, you talk about what you guys did, because that was 91 was the first women's World Cup,
Yeah,
right?
going way
And
back. Yeah,
and
huh.
then so I mean 99 kind of put you on that stage, and you feel like in some ways that it had been there forever, but you guys in a lot of ways created that stage that then is continuing, but you've passed the baton. And one of the things, I was reading something that you'd written, and you said our goal, and you were talking about this as well, our goal is twofold: to leave the game in a better place for the next generation, and to be an inspiration for all seeking equal rights. And what's interesting for me in that too is the idea of like all for equal rights too. I mean, it's really easy to clamor for yourself, isn't it? For say,
Right.
well, we women need to be seen for who we are, but equal rights for all is trying to find that universal message that connects people, and isn't seeing that same sort of differentiation. But how have you been able to pass that baton so well? Is it because the women now grew up idolizing you when when they were
Right.
little
They had
girls?
they had no choice. I one of the things we were very cognizant of as we were playing is making sure, for example, our national team at the time, when you had younger kids come onto the team, you made sure that they understood what we valued, and not just in a sense of here's the X's and O's of how you play the game, but um, we wanted them to know that really we really valued the we over the me, and the culture that that represented, and that meant our off the field fights as well, the contractual fights. I mean, when you have a player like Mia Hamm, who is your superstar, but she never wants more than anyone else, she wanted it to be even across the board. It didn't matter if you played every minute, scored every goal, wore a captain's armband. It didn't matter to the player that was 23 on the roster and never got a minute. Like, that should be the same equal pay structure for all of us. And those are the kind of things we fought for from the very beginning. And our lawyer used to joke that we were a bunch of socialists, and we'd be like, no, we just cared deeply about keeping it even for everyone and equal for everyone. And so we would pass the baton by teaching that younger generation as they came through. We would have them sit in meetings with us. We would have them participate in our leadership meetings. So when, for example, we'd have a meeting with the coach, we would never just meet with the captain and the coach. It would be a larger group, and it would encompass all the different age groups of the national team, so that they could understand and listen and learn and hopefully grow, so that when we all left the national team, that they would carry that baton. And so I think that's why there was such. I was just with some of the younger players at the ESPYS last night, and there's such joy in seeing what they've done in this current team, and finding this incredible balance to still be dominant on the field, but also to fight for change off the field. And that's what we cared so deeply about. And to see them, for example, get equal pay over the line was huge for us. We were like, yes, they did it. We finally got there. So yeah, I think that gives us great pride, because we felt like that was important to pass that baton and say to them, sprint like hell, just keep running, just run, run, run. You're gonna be fine. Just keep running.
Where did that all come from? The idea of the we over me, though, too, which I mean, it makes perfect sense, but it's not necessarily intuitive as far as human beings are concerned. Was there
Mm-hmm.
something that you guys came together and said, this is who we want to be, or was there leadership? How did that all work?
Well, I think we realized early the foundation of this national team, going back to Anson Dorrance, who was one of the first national team coaches, was that he valued and he made sure all these principles became our foundation. Working for each other, grinding it out, this blue collar kind of ethic behind the mentality of the team. He used to talk about how he admired talent, but he he ultimately had such respect for courage and for being a good teammate. And so from the very first days of me being on the national team, those were all the things that we were learning. Um, and
And
then
that
it
was at
became,
16, right? Is that
yeah, 16 years old. And then, it became, we realized if we got that right, and the we over the me, then we were very successful. And you obviously you want to be winning. So team chemistry and team unity, and that part of the equation became very, very important, because we realized if we could get that right, then often we were winning World Cups, we were winning Olympics. And of course, it helps when you have a lot of talent and you have Mia Hamm's and Brady Chastain's and all of those. But um, it's not just that. I mean, that's the thing I think people get so wrong, is they don't understand, if you get the team chemistry element of it right, where you want to just run through walls for people, and it doesn't matter what your role is, then good things happen. And that's not just in sports, that's in everything, and cultures you're building within groups and communities. And so um we got that right often, not always, but we got it right often. And that's where I think that was our secret sauce for so many years.
what about the idea of sort of being on the outside looking in to a certain extent? I mean, they didn't want to even call it a World Cup, the first World Cup that you went to, right? I mean, they weren't
Yeah,
sure if it would actually
yeah,
be a World Cup, right?
yeah.
And does that reinforce that sense of we versus me? Like we've got to
Oh,
be really
absolutely.
strong because we're
Yeah.
playing the game, but we're playing history, we're playing society, we're playing, I don't know, I'm putting words in your mouth.
Totally. Yeah. Totally. Because you are on the outside looking in. And so you're trying to change the model and change what it looks like. And it's a model that honestly wasn't one that FIFA cared deeply about or cared at all about back in the day. Right. We'd be like, we don't care what you think about women's soccer. If you love it or hate it, you're just missing out on all this untapped potential. And the thing that honestly turned the game for us is that there was money that you're leaving on the table. And that's what we used to say. We're like, okay, we can't get to them any other way. Oh, here's how we get to them. You're leaving money on the table. Okay. Like, do you care about, yes, you care about money. We know that. You're leaving money on the table. We used to say to US soccer all the time. Do you know how much potential is out there for women in women's soccer? Um, so that was a huge unifier. And I think for anyone who's been on the outside looking in on anything that, you're trying to change, you can understand um that there's unity for sure in that misery. And so and you feel it. I mean, it burns. It's like, you get to a point where you get so angry. Um, and our decision, which is another great life lesson, was, how do you take that anger about being marginalized and turn it into something really productive and positive, and instead of just bitching about it being, us being marginalized and them not caring. We were done doing that. We got to a point where, and honestly, Billie Jean King was the one who helped us get to that point where she's like, well, what are you doing about it? I'm like, well, I don't know. We don't feel like we have any power. She's like, what are you talking about? Get it done, Foudy. Um, and so she was the one that made us realize, oh, we can do something about this, and let's stop complaining and actually move on this and turn it into, positive action.
How did that? Because I mean, one, it makes perfect sense, right? I mean, there's a huge demographic that you're talking about, the female sports demographic. You know, the moms are often the ones spending most of the money, right? So that's a desirable demographic for the advertisers. How do you take that step and go from, hey, there's huge potential here, to what, back in '99, it was like it was Nike and Pert and some of these others that introduced us to you.
Mm-hmm.
How do you get to that point where you get the bigger megaphone? Where, I mean, Nike, what, that's like the biggest, their biggest sports advertising in the world, right? I mean,
Right. Right. Um, well, it took a lot of rattling of the cages. I would have hoped, we thought, oh, well, you win a World Cup and you'll get there. And it was like, yeah, nope, no one cared still in 1991. It's still the best kept secret that we won a World Cup. Um, and so I think um, a lot of it was just literally like shaking people going, it's got to change, and we've got to help build it. And it took a ton of work. Like, for example, us hosting that 99 World Cup came with a lot of sweat equity from the players. We were doing clinics, we were doing autograph sessions, we were doing promotional things literally every week. And we would joke like, if you need us to knock on people's front doors to get butts in the seats, we will do that. We're fine with that. And because we had a point to prove, we wanted to prove that what we had been saying for so long, that there is all this untapped potential in women's soccer and women's sports. And it wasn't just women's soccer. We felt like, okay, this is a showcase for something even bigger than that. This is how every women's world global event should be held and staged. And so we did put a lot of work into it, and really had to constantly say, what are we doing? How are we marketing this? How are we supporting this? And I think the big turning point, of course, was when, you know, the 99 World Cup did as well as it did with the eyeballs and attention. And that's because there was, you know, a local organizing committee that spent 3 years with, you know, marketing efforts and grassroots efforts, and they actually, you know, put some muscle behind it. Then this is the result. You get, you know, 90,000 people packing stadiums, and you get a worldwide audience, and great numbers. 40 million watched that final. So I think that was the turning point where people saw the potential, and that's why I'm so proud of 99, because we could have very easily done it in smaller stadiums, kept it regionalized, which is what FIFA wanted, not gone big, and no one would ever be talking about, you know, women's sports at this level, I don't think, if we had done that.
It's an interesting question, right? Because so much of it is your job as effectively a professional athlete is to train and compete. But it sounds like that was not the huge part of your job, right? I mean, it was like maybe 20, almost listening to you, it sounds like that was almost like 25% of what you did. And you were building something that I'd imagine there's such a huge pride of ownership in creating something like that for all of you as teammates. But it's so different than so many of the other sports that we see. Like if you were a little bit taller, if you'd been a male basketball player with the same kind of, level of skill, it would have been an entirely different journey for you, where it's kind of going from one place to the other. Because obviously you were successful as well, so it didn't detract from your ability to compete. I mean, I don't think it did. You might have been a little bit tired, but you might have been energized as well. But that journey, how do you look at that journey and say, this is the journey that I was on, it was the journey that I was supposed to be on, but at the same time, it could have been an entirely different journey. How do you look at it and say, would you do it differently, I guess, is what I say, or what I'm asking?
Yeah. No, it's a great point. We used to say that all the time. Like, why do we have to spend all this energy fighting for this stuff? It's a lot. It's like, God, I just want someone to say, no, you don't have to fight for that anymore. We're good. It's interesting because now I'm a co-owner with Angel City, which is a women's professional team in Los Angeles. And I remember one of the first meetings with some of the owners that were founding owners who were women. Natalie Portman is one, Julie Ehrman, Kara Nortman, these three awesome women that founded the club. And basically, I was kind of giving the normal, like, why this matters, women's sports, and why this investment matters. And you used to have to expend a lot of energy explaining to people like why you should bet on women. And they were like, yeah, we get it. No shit. This is why we're in this. You don't have to expend any more energy explaining that to us. I was like, oh, thank God. It's so tiring to have to explain to everyone why. And that's how I felt like our entire career was, because it was literally explaining to people. You expended a lot of energy explaining why you should bet on women and why women's sports mattered. And obviously you don't have to do that nowadays as much, but at the same time, and we used to joke about, how tiring that was off the field. But I, to your point, actually gained a lot of energy by doing that. It's another conversation I've had a lot of, conversations with Billie Jean King about, is that, she says, yeah, being, you guys essentially were the first generation. We were the first generation in tennis. You were the first generation in soccer, and it sucks. It's a lot of work. It's hard. But at the same time, you're changing something that you're leaving this indelible imprint on the sport and on society in a way that others aren't able to do. And by that, I would never change it. I would never go back and say, oh, I'd love to be getting, the salaries that this current women's national team. Well, maybe I would love that. I would love that part of it. But, you look back and go, okay, well, yes, that $10 a day per diem, and you're fighting for more than just $10 a day per diem, was hard, but actually, as they say in the movies, the hard is what makes it great, right? And so that's really, I think, our legacy too, is being able to deal with the hard, and expending all that energy was part of who we were.
It's yeah, and you never really stop the fight, right? I mean, it's one of those, like you talk about the Rose Bowl and filling the Rose Bowl, which was absolutely amazing. And it's kind of, I feel like in some ways it's sort of like, in some ways that final is kind of like the miracle kind of thing at with 1980, of like, well, where were you?
Right.
And I was racing wheelchairs in Toronto at the time, so I was actually in my hotel room watching
Aw,
there,
yeah.
which was very cool. And but I think it was such a monumental moment for so many people. But it's also like, you do get those monumental moments and you think, well, this is it. Now we've arrived. And
Mhm.
then you can go back to, from having very few fans to filling the Rose Bowl, to then going back to very few fans again, right? Where
Mhm.
where
Yeah.
you're riding that wave. How do you keep the fight, I guess, when
Yeah.
you're
Well,
sort
that's
of riding
interesting you
that
say
wave?
that, because that, there was never a, oh, we've made it, type of feeling from 99, because we knew. We knew, and we called it wholesome discontent, is something our Dr. Colleen Hacker, who worked on our national team with our national team for many years, called it this wholesome discontent, where you were constantly like, okay, that was fantastic, but we can be better and we can do more. Um and in a healthy way, hence the wholesome, because we also know there's a lot of uh unhealthy discontent that, can lead to many things that aren't positive. But this team and this group, immediately after 99, was like, okay, that was great, but how do we sustain that, and how do we make sure it's not just an anomaly, it's actually the standard that we're carrying forward for, the rest of the lifetime of this team. And it took longer than actually I had hoped. I thought after 99 and people seeing packed stadiums, it would be like, oh, there'll be this global transformation and people will understand the value of women's sports and the standard. And yet, I feel like 20 years later, now almost 25, we finally got to it. It took another 2 decades to get to the realization of what women's sports and the value of that is. So it took longer than, changing society and cultures is a slow process, as it turns out. You can't just give them the back of your hand and slap them around a bit and say, okay, we shall change. But I do feel like we're there finally, and in a moment for women's sports in particular, and as we're seeing with women, that feels very gratifying, given, the slog that it has been for many years.
You were saying the value of women's sport. How do you define the value of women's sports if it's reaching that point where we're realizing the value of women's sports? What does that mean?
Well, for so long we've said, "Oh my gosh, and it was mostly anecdotal. Like there's a market, and there's eyeballs, and there's attention, and there's a thirst and hunger for more programming, more marketing, more games. And people would kind of like roll their eyes and go, yeah, okay, sure. And then they'd say, no one cares. Um, and now you see the data, you see the numbers. It's not just anecdotal. You're seeing, the sponsorship levels, the revenue coming in on the women's side, the attention, the eyeballs, the numbers they're drawing with ratings. And a lot of that is, for example, at ESPN where I work, now you're seeing, women's sports on ABC, and you're seeing women's sports on ESPN primetime, and you're seeing them in primetime slots that were once only dedicated to men. And, and yet they're still surprised that, oh my gosh, actually they're doing well in those slots. Well, yeah, people will watch if you put it on. And so that transformation has been slow, but you're seeing now the data to back it up, and the sponsorship. For example, at Angel City, before we'd even played a game in our first year of women's professional soccer in Los Angeles, the club had raised 35 million in sponsorship revenue before we'd even stepped on the field. So, it was, valued at 3 million, the club, when it was bought. Now clubs are selling for 50 million on the women's side, right? And that's just going to keep escalating. So you're seeing all the data that backs it up. But most importantly, you're seeing women on television, you're seeing them visible, you're seeing them in spaces where people can actually watch now. And so that is hugely gratifying as well.
I would imagine. And so for you, did you see the telling of the story was the becoming a journalist? Was that an offshoot? Because you had choices, right? I mean, you could have gone to med school at Stanford, or stayed in sport and continued to slog it out. I mean, obviously med
Right.
school is a bit of a slog, and being a doctor is a slog
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah.
But slogging it out in a way that doesn't always seem gratifying, is so personal, but
Right.
where those gains can be really incremental, and not necessarily the mainstream kind of path of like, what do you do for a career? Well, I'm a doctor. That makes it a little bit easier. What do you do for a career? I'm promoting women's sport in a variety of different ways. And it's like, oh, okay. Is there a job that does that? How does that
Right.
work? Right. Did you
Right.
see journalism as a logical offshoot to tell that
Not
story? Was that part of what you'd always done?
Not really. I mean, I kind of fell into journalism, and I always considered, growing up, you didn't see a lot of women on TV doing sports broadcasting. And so I had thought, oh my God, I loved Howard Cosell. I loved watching sports as a kid, but I never saw it as a viable option for me growing up. And yet I had a producer who came to me when I was on the national team and said, you're really natural and comfortable on camera. Have you ever thought about television? And I was like, not really. I was going to go the more traditional path, be a doctor, go to med school. I had gotten into med school. And so it wasn't until this person was like, hey, you should try it. Why not? And so I started calling games while I was still playing on the national team, as just, to check it out, as, just to dabble. I like to dabble in things all the time. And then I quickly realized no one wants this energy and personality in a hospital or in a lab, 24 hours a day, inside. I was like, nope, I could not, I would not make a good doctor. I would drive people batty with my energy. So quickly said, nope, it wasn't even a soccer decision. It was like, I just don't want that as a lifestyle. And so I deferred for 2 years at, medical school, and then decided, after all of the hum bio and organic chem and physics, God, what a waste that I took in my life, that I wouldn't be utilizing any of that. I could have been doing, like, journalism. How about that? Learning how to be a journalist. Uh, so I did fall into it, but then I quickly realized too that, we're not telling many stories about women. We're not sharing the path of these, incredible athletes, that we're covering a lot of great men's stories, and there are plenty, but we're not really telling the women's side of the story. And so then became largely an advocate at ESPN for telling women's stories, and which is why we, started our podcast. We felt like there wasn't enough in the space 5 years ago of people learning about these amazing women, who are doing incredible things. So yeah, so then, just through my advocacy on the team, is like, you start to realize, oh, okay, now in this space, I can make a difference too, in terms of the visibility. And so that actually, when I think of all the different things I've done in my journalistic career, that's the thing that gives me most pride, is we've told a lot of great stories about amazing women.
Who do you have like a muse, like an audience that you think of when you're doing commentary? So for instance, for me, I often think of my mother. My mother,
Mm,
traveled around, but she, didn't necessarily know all of the lingo and everything and all of that stuff. I mean, I read about your dad saying that it was a busy time for him, so at work, so he might not be able to make it to the World Cup, kind of thing. So that's an audience. And I also try to think of the athletes, or like the families of the athletes, to have them go, okay, that might have been a harsh comment, but it's fair, it's honest.
right, right.
Like those are kind of the ones that I think of. Do you have those people that you're thinking of? Are you thinking of the little girl who's starting out in soccer? Or are you who
Right.
have that?
Yeah. That's a really good question. Um, I I don't think of it in that regard, because I do feel that we attract a very large audience. My biggest challenge is, how do you keep an audience that's new to the sport in, right? And this is what I think about probably the most. How do you balance, you have people who are watching soccer maybe for the first time, or are new to the sport, and not getting too technical, but at the same time not dumbing it down, so that the rabid soccer fan is going, why is she explaining what a penalty kick is? Well, why is she using this terminology? So the balance of both, of which I think for any soccer commentator, that's always the challenge in the United States, is, as the market continues to grow, um, is uh is realizing that you want to make it accessible and understandable, but you can't talk to them like, they've never watched or seen the sport. I mean, there's just so many fans in this country that um are incredible fans and rabid fans, that I try and speak to them mostly, but make it accessible.
Make it accessible, right? Because you have to continue to grow those numbers in order to be
Yeah.
successful and grow those fans that hopefully
And it
they
also Yeah, and it also depends, what network you're on. If you're on a bigger network, honestly, often the conversation will be, for any sport I do, is like, okay, we're on ABC. Not everyone's going to understand it. You talk a little differently. Or we're on ESPN. Like, it's a broader audience than, when you go on to something that's a little bit more hardcore. The diehards are going to find you on this channel. So that's interesting as well. It depends on what you're on.
how have you enjoyed the podcast part of it? So you've been doing the commentary, you've been
Yeah.
started with the commentary, you're writing, you're doing features, you're doing so many different things. Podcast is a little bit different medium.
Oh yeah. I actually, my producer who co-hosts the podcast with me at ESPN, she pushed me way, way back 10 years ago to be doing podcasts. And I was like, "Ah, I don't want to get into the podcast space." I mean, already 10 years ago, it felt like a lot of people were in it. Now it's like, what? Um, and I was like, nah, it just feels so crowded. How do you differentiate yourself from it? And she's like, You're gonna love it. I'm telling you, it's totally different." And so 5 years ago is when we launched, and I'm like, kicking myself that I didn't get in earlier, because it's so much fun. As you know, it's just there's nothing like the conversations you can have, and when you're on television and you're sitting down in front of a camera and there's lights and it's formal, it's a very different conversation. And even though, this is on video and this is being recorded, it's just such a different vibe that I love. It's more my vibe. And so and the stories you get from people, as you know, Chris, where that's our goal every day too, is I just want to sit and learn. I want to grow. I want to hear about, your stories and what you've been through. And so it doesn't feel like a job. I'm like, wait, what? This this is a job? This isn't a job. This is fun. It's incredible. You get to learn from all these amazing humans.
Yeah, are we already recording or are we just having a conversation?
Right.
It really is. It's an interesting medium. And looking at, so what will you be doing, because the World Cup is going to be starting soon, the Women's World Cup down under, right, in New Zealand and
Yeah.
Australia. What will you be doing down there? Because ESPN is not covering this one, right? So
No, we don't cover. Yeah, we haven't had the World Cup since 2014, actually. Um, so no, I actually will be doing some. All my soccer got moved over to Turner Sports, Warner Brothers Discovery.
mhm.
They most recently acquired all the rights to US soccer games that aren't World Cup, not all games, but most of the friendlies. So I now do stuff with TNT and HBO Max for the soccer side of it. I still kept my non-soccer stuff on ESPN, but for the soccer side of it, so I'll be doing some stuff for CNN, just some light reporting for them while I'm over there. I don't have to be over the entire time because the second half of the tournament actually conflicts with I do a ton for Little League World Series for ESPN. So I'll
Do for the
start
Little League
doing
World Series. That's soccer and Little League World Series sound
yeah.
good.
I know nothing about baseball really. I just talk to people and it's so fun. They're like, just go have fun. I'm like, okay, I can do that. I can go talk to people, talk to the parents, I talk to the kids. I mean, it's all 12-year-olds. It's my perfect demographic. I figure under 12, over 80, that's my demo. Um, so yeah, it's so I'll just be doing actually be going for the first time in a long time. Usually you're covering it every day, you're in press conferences every day. I'll be going, to do some reporting, yes, for CNN, but I'll actually be enjoying it, which is really nice because I've never been in New Zealand. So I'm like, I'm getting down there. I'm going for 2 weeks down to New Zealand. So
And will you bungee jump while you're in New Zealand?
I hope so. I gotta, I've been so busy this summer. I had to do Special Olympics coverage over in Berlin as well. So I've been kind of running, and I literally, my sister's going, and her husband. I literally emailed her yesterday. I was like, any research on what we should be doing? I need help. I'm not good at that. You know that. I don't want to get over there but we have some friends that live in Auckland, so we're staying with them. And I figure, they're locals. They're Kiwis. They'll be like, here's what you do. You got it. And get a car and go.
That'll be perfect. I skied down there for a month. The first,
Really?
what was it? I guess it was the first summer after I started skiing. So I spent a month down there, down in the South Island. So that's
Yeah,
where
that's like
I did
Queenstown
bungee jump.
area, right?
Queenstown, which is sort of like a New Zealand version of Disneyland kind of thing, where you get
I
like
know.
the jet boat rides, you get the bungee jumping.
I
Skiing was
know.
down there as well. So yeah, I think you will have a great, it's amazing, just beautiful place. The one thing that always blew me away was our coaches and ski coaches, probably like soccer coaches, are taking more risks oftentimes than maybe they should be. And they had 1 lane bridges. So you would go along and it's a 2 lane road, but it was a 1 lane bridge. And so I would just remember them going fast and then like just beeping and just continuing to go across this 1 lane
Oh
bridge. And I'm like,
God.
okay, well, this could be it. This could be all over now. So, and what are you expecting? I mean, the US is going for an unprecedented three-peat in these
Yeah.
games, right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I mean, it's never been done by any men's or women's national team to win back to back to back. So it's not going to be easy. It's so hard now, and especially as the popularity of women's soccer has grown and the investment and funding and all that. Europe especially, their teams are so good. So um I mean, they for sure could do it. It's just going to be really hard, and especially the US has a ton of injuries. Every team, I feel like, the injuries are always a huge part of what your final World Cup roster looks like, but it just feels like it's a lot this year. I was talking to some national team teammates the other day, and we're like, God, does it seem more than normal? And some big names, their captain Becky Sauerbrunn for the US is out with a foot injury, which is a huge blow. Really, the most informed player in the world, I think you could argue, got hurt in April. Mal Swanson, formerly Mal Pugh, is another big name on the US women's national team. She was just lighting it up and tore her patellar tendon, and so she's out. So those things hurt. But Yeah, it's a chance to make history, and I would never, underestimate this women's team, but the European group with England and Germany and Spain and France, those 4 in particular are gonna be really good.
How do you look at, because you were the golden age of soccer. How do you, or I mean, at least that's what the journalist said, right? So how do you look at the quality of play now versus the quality of play? I mean, you hope that it continues to improve, right? Of when you were competing.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the depth of players you have as well, and just this, especially in the US, you have just so many girls playing, millions of kids playing. Imagine that, the pool you're pulling from. And so that's very different. And the way in which they're training them is entirely different, right? With all the data and analytics that go into it. My pregame meal was donuts, and a huge cinnamon roll bigger than my head was, a good sign that there was going to be a good game. And now, they've got their protein shakes all lined up after training, at training, that's specific to each player. I was like, what? Come on, there's no protein shakes. If I could grab a bagel at the end, I was excited. And so yeah, it is a lot different to see the evolution of the game and how far they've come. And especially when, there used to be just if you could count on one hand how many teams could potentially win a World Cup, and now it's very different, right? It's just they're broadening that base of teams that are vying for a World Cup title, and that's such a good sign.
And soccer is also one of those sports where anything can happen too. It can be, you can totally dominate and not win a game.
Exactly. Yeah, it's frustrating, right? And they call it the beautiful game, but sometimes it's sucky. It's the sucky game sometimes. You can dominate, and you can totally possess the ball and outplay an opponent, and then they get one counterattack and boom, they score. But it is really the interesting part of soccer is that, the chess match that it becomes if you can just keep a game tight, even if you're, overplayed and outplayed the entire 90 minutes, you still have a chance at trying to sneak one out. So and that's actually what a lot of teams do against the United States. They know they've got a lot of players, a lot of talent, a lot of speed, a lot of athleticism, and they just keep it tight, keep it compact. They play in, they call it a low block in soccer. They just keep it really, really compact, and if they can stay in the game long enough, then maybe they can pick something out with a set piece or a counterattack, and that does happen for sure.
It really does. So you were talking about going to New Zealand and getting to spend a little bit of time. I did see something recently where you're talking about improving the quality of life, like giving yourself a little bit of time and not just working all the time. How is
Yeah.
that working out?
Yeah, that was my COVID reset moment, right? As we all had. Uh yeah, I'm playing a lot of beach volleyball and some pickleball, of course. And so like this is a perfect example. Typically I'd go and I'd cover and be on the road a month. I'm gone most of the summers. And so, my kids often, I have a 14 and 16-year-old. I don't see them during the summers because I'm, traveling. They get to travel, so it's not all bad. They come with me at the end of events often, to an Olympics or a World Cup. But I thought, I don't need to cover this like I've covered it in the past. I don't need to be spending every day at a press conference. I can cover this and still go and have some balance and actually see the country and enjoy it a little bit more. So those are all the little decisions you get to make later in your life when you're wise and old like I am. Finally wise and old. Well, actually maybe not wise, just old, but getting wiser every
Wiser.
day
Yeah.
and wiser. And so those are the things you start to tinker with career choices too of, do I want to cover every soccer game out there? No, I don't. I just want to cover the ones I care about deeply, and then I can, have a little more time. I just figure, there's only like 4 or 5 years I'm gonna have the kids around. So in the house, I want to be a little more present. So I've been really working hard on that, on not traveling as much, because unfortunately, as I tell the kids, people don't come to my couch. I have to go to theirs. One day, maybe they'll come to my couch, but I still have to, when I do an interview, I have to go to them. When I call a game, I have to go to the game. The game doesn't happen here. But I mean, it's been such a blessing to call this a career, because as I said, it just doesn't feel like you're working. And that's the nice thing. I've been, taking my 14-year-old this summer on a lot of stuff with me, my son, and he's like, Mom, this is what you do for a living? He's like, this is so much fun. Maybe I should go into this. I'm like, I know, it is kind of fun. And you should. It's a good living.
It's a good living, but you've also worked hard enough that now you get to make some of those choices as well.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
makes
Well,
life a
thank you,
little bit
Chris.
easier.
Tell my kids that because they're like, you don't even work. I was like, what? Yes, I do.
We've talked, you can give them this podcast if you'd like, because we've just
Yes.
talked about what 33 years of work, right? 32 years of work,
Yep.
33, something like that. So anyway, Julie, thank you for working so hard. Thank you for being a model for me and for so many other people out there. Thank you for bringing joy into what you're doing, into the lives of so many people, and the idea of we over me, and just doing
Oh,
such a
thank you.
great job. Yeah, thank you.
Oh, thank you, Chris. Thanks for all you're doing. You're the model, my man. You are an incredible inspiration. So I I I know you say, we have been a model for you, but don't ever underestimate all that you're doing for people as well. So thanks for being a constant inspiration.
I appreciate it. Thank you. And thank you to all of you for tuning in. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you have, please tell your friends. Tell your friends to tune in, to like us, to follow us, to subscribe, and we will continue to bring you great content. We'll see you next time. Thank you for joining us. Please subscribe to Chris Waddell Living It for more stories on the adaptive community, the Paralympics, artists, athletes, entrepreneurs, experts in the experience of being human. Also follow us on Spotify, Apple, Facebook, and Instagram. I look forward to seeing you next week.